Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you all here for this the latest event in this series of events organized by the Anglo-Turkish Society. My name is Michael Katatias. I am a friend of the Anglo-Turkish Society, and I'm replacing the usual chair, David Shankland, who's unable to be here today. So, as you can probably tell from the number of people attending this evening, that this is an attractive subject, an interesting subject for many, and so it's a great delight for me to chair this subject. It's also an area which I'm myself focused on academically as a historian of Izmir. So we are delighted to be joined this evening by Vassilis Colonas, who is Emeritus Professor at the University of Thessaly in the Department of Architecture. Vassilis is going to be presenting the latest in a series of books that he's written, this one focusing on Smyrna, entitled The City and Architecture, the Contribution of the Greeks. So it basically charts the transformation of the city architecturally through the 19th and early 20th century, and considers the role of Greeks and Greek architects in that transformation. And through this architectural development, architectural transformation, he considers several themes which are important in this period of history in Izmir. So modernization, cosmopolitanism, and also the economics and ideology behind architectural creation. And I think today that Vassilis is going to perhaps widen the lens to consider not only the Greeks as a subject, but also the context in which they operate, the water in which they're swimming in this period of late Ottoman Izmir. Because, of course, as a very cosmopolitan place with many different cultural groups, ethnic groups, religious groups, the Greeks were very much part of a wider whole rather than a standalone subject in and of themselves. And this is, of course, the height of Izmir's commercial and political importance, when around 40 to 45% of all Ottoman exports pass through the city. So it's an important time in the period in the history of Izmir. And we're delighted to have Vassilis with us to present his book, City and Architecture, the Contribution of the Greeks. So what we're going to do is pass over to Vassilis. Vassilis has got some slides that he's going to present to us. He will present the slides, and then we'll have a tete-a-tete between us before opening up the floor for questions. So without further ado, I welcome Vassilis Kolonas and ask him to share his screen and begin his presentation.
Thank you so much for the invitation and the introduction. And I'll try to present my book. It was not my first trying to present Greek architects in Smyrna. It was another book some 20 years ago, written in English. And this time we are not still have this translation into English. But the previous book was about the Greek architects in the whole Ottoman Empire, with case studies Istanbul, Thessaloniki, and Izmir. But then, as I found more material on Izmir, I tried to make a monography. So it's just 10 months that this book is on bookshops, and we'll try soon to have an English translation and then into Turkish. So I can share the screen. You can make me. Okay. I think we have the full screen. You can see all of you. It's okay?
Yes, it looks fine, Vassili.
Okay, this is the cover of the last book about city and architecture, the contribution of the Greeks. And this is the previous book, which is sold out in very few months after the first edition, some 20 years ago. So we hope we have the same opportunity to make it public, the second one. So, Smyrna. From as early as the period of the Enlightenment, and especially following the signing of the Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca in 1774, with its very favorable terms for shipping and trade, Smyrna had begun to evolve rapidly into a dynamic metropolis. In 1717, it had a population of 30,000 people, 10 of whom were Greeks. 100 years later, the population had grown to 150, with the Greek community now numbering 60,000. This dramatic increase in the size of the Greek population was mainly due to the large-scale migration from the Peloponnese, Crete, and the islands of the Aegean and Ionian seas. As the 18th century drew to a close, a new middle class emerged, engaged in commercial activities. Many Greeks were now in possession of substantial capital and, under the protection of Russia and England, engaged in banking and trading ventures, competing with major European businesses. By the end of the 19th century, Smyrna had acquired a distinct identity in the mind of the Ottomans and was known as Infidel Smyrna, Yaur Izmir, a city where the Muslim population was outnumbered by the other ethnic communities, mainly Christians and Jews. As for the spatial distribution around the city of the various communities, the Greeks lived for the most part close to the port and the commercial center in the French Quarter, Franco-Machala, French Quarter, which had been home to the European population, English, French, Dutch, Venetians, and Genoans, since the 16th century. The Jewish community lived in the higher areas of the city and the Muslim in the upper city. European residents had their homes in the city center and also at Buja and Bornova, the outskirts of the city. European residents had their homes in the, apart from the Greek population within the city itself, there were also Greek communities settled in the surrounding areas close to the city, along the coast, and at key points along the road and rail network, providing easy access to Smyrna. The city underwent an important phase of its evolution during the 19th century and in the years leading up to 1922. The main characteristic of this phase was the large-scale expansion of the urban space and the predominance of the non-Muslim, mainly Greek population. The wide-ranging reforms introduced by the Ottoman Empire between 1839 and 1856, the Tanzimat, as you know, and the economic and cultural penetration by Europeans led, as a direct consequence, to the rise of the minorities, the non-Muslim populations, and in the case of Smyrna in particular, the Greeks and Armenians. The old spatial and factional divisions and distinctions, neighborhoods populated exclusively by particular ethnic religious communities, became less rigorous, while new districts emerged with different identities. Central functions, areas devoted to leisure activities and high-income housing, working class districts, elegant suburbs for permanent house rather than summer homes, and run-down, neglected neighborhoods. The rapid development and simultaneous expansion of the city were stimulated by the major infrastructure projects undertaken by foreign companies during the period from the mid-1850s to 1870. A project of a greater significance for the form and structure of the city was the construction of the port and waterfront from 1869 to 1875, originally an English initiative, but finally undertaken by the French company Dussault Frères. The engineer was Polycarpos Vitalis, who was also involved in the construction of the Thessaloniki waterfront in the early 1870s. This was the seafront before the construction of the new quay. We see how it was the sea line before. And the similar plan applied to Thessaloniki by the same engineer, Polycarpos Vitalis. We will watch later the final project by Vitalis for Smyrna. A strip of land, 100 meters wide and 3 kilometers long, was created along the old coastline using landfill. Extend the earth on the water. In all, 40 hectares were added to the surface area of the city. The waterfront boulevard was the first modern road to be created in Smyrna. The road itself occupied 12 meters of the overall 20 meters width of the waterfront strip, which also included a tram line. During the construction of the new quay, and the final result, when we have already the quay, le quai, as it was widely known in Smyrna dialect, the building lots adjacent to this seafront was the most expensive of the whole city. Obvious the reason. All the most lucrative functions, new types of leisure facilities, theaters, hotels, clubs, found themselves competing for a waterfront site. A new division of the area now took shape, reflecting distinctions of an economic and social character. Along the length of the new waterfront, the type of the Smyrna urban house, we can see here, but we will discuss it later, was created, and groups of affluent Greeks, Armenians, and Europeans made their homes. In the spatial development of Smyrna, as it made the transition from the 19th to the 20th century, one can discern the existence of two parallel cities. To the south, the old city with the old neighborhoods on the hill, and of course the traditional market, on the site of the ex-medieval harbor. To the north, the European city, which grew up as the European merchants arrived and absorbed the whole spectrum of economic, social, and technological change, the city which was to be lost in the destruction of Smyrna in 1922. This dualism was already apparent as early as 1889 to the Turkish administrators, such as Mithat Pasas, well known also from Thessaloniki, who sought ways, mainly through urban planning, to encourage the Europeanization, the modernization of other parts of the city too. Some fascinating texts were produced proposing the widening of boulevards and remodeling of whole districts in the old city to regenerate the area and allowed it to develop along the same lines as the waterfront and the northern districts. The most ambitious plan for the regeneration and embellishment of Smyrna, but never realized, was undertaken by the French company Générale d'Entreprise and the recommendation of the architect and civil engineer Polycarpos Vitalis, and involved the widening of three boulevards. The boulevards were to be 20 to 30 meters in width, and even broader and certain key points, intersections. They would have an asphalt surface, and the pavements would be paved in marble. The boulevards, I quote, of course, the boulevards, buildings, and piazzas would have electric lighting to be installed by the company itself. As for the buildings which would line the boulevards, they were to be the height of elegance. The magazine Cosmos concludes its remarks on this ambitious project by urging the people of Smyrna to close their eyes and imagine vision of the city of the future. I quote, "Imagine this city of boulevards with its fine marble buildings, the asphalt roads and pavements, bathed in electric light, the pedestrian marveling at the displays in the windows of the luxury stores lining the streets, while along the road motor vehicles whizzed past on another with the speed and energy which are the landmarks, the hallmarks of progress and modern civilization." The perspective drawing you can see now, presented by the magazine with the subtitle View of the Boulevard Number 1, as it passes through the Chacmac Bakery district, in fact represents a design by the Spanish architect José López Salaberry for the widening of the Grand Via in Madrid and its intersection with Alcalá Street. The project had been funded by the same construction company, which hoped to bring the splendors of Baron Haussmann, as it was quoted, from Madrid to Smyrna. So it was an image of Madrid, showing how it could be Smyrna if this widening of the three boulevards could be created. Architecture. The literature contains a number of references to the architects of Smyrna, the overwhelming majority of whom were Greeks. The Almanac and Guide to Smyrna for the year 1888, published by the Amalthea newspaper, mentions the following architects: Aslan Effendi, Vitalis Rokos, Vitalis Polycarpos, Veris, Kokkinos, Latris, Manganiotis, Markosov, Pezaros, Petrokokkinos, Rabaonis, and Stefanidis. 30 years later, the Greek Geo Guide for 1920 lists a new generation of architects: Apostolidis, Ophiadis, Ismirlis, Kourmoulis, Kokkinos, Kalokerinos, Lignadis, Litis, Petrokokkinos, the son of the previous, Kokkinos, Simitopoulos, Nechal, and Perret. Perret was the architect of the clock tower in the Konak Square in Smyrna. As for the public buildings of Smyrna, those constructed at the initiative of the state or municipal authorities, there is little information in either Greek or Turkish literature. According to the Building News newspaper, we can attribute the Konak to Rokos Vitalis from Tinos, at many of the government buildings to Dimitris Lignadis. The Konak, which still dominates the main square in Smyrna, was constructed in the last decades of the 19th century in a neoclassical style, which evokes the early attempts to transfer Western models to the first public buildings of the most important Ottoman cities. We can see the same thing in Thessaloniki, in Bursa, in other cities. As for the neighboring barracks, with their eclectic style, recent research has attributed them to the master builder Eustratios Kalonaris, again from the island of Tinos, widely known as Smyrneos, who designed the Evangelistria Church of Tinos, his native islands. I can show you now some pictures of buildings designed by Greek architects from other communities, not for the Ottoman state, nor for the Greek community. So we can see the plans that the Vitalis family, Polycarpos, his son, and his brother, designed for the first consulate in Izmir, and building owned by the French consulate, the French hospital, the Armenian cathedral by Calonaris, and the Anglican church by Vitalis. In each turn, the Greek community, the largest in the city in terms of population, took advantage of the improved legal status offered by the Ottoman reforms to renew the architecture of the community's churches and to introduce special types of building to house its schools. On the 21 churches functioning in 1922, most had been built or subjected to radical modification in the second half of the 19th century. Prior to the 19th century was the old Church of Agios Ioannis Theologos in Smyrna's upper town. We can see the picture, which was last rebuilt in 1804. The other church in the upper town, Agios Voukolos, which was founded in 1866 on the site of an ancient Christian church, was saved from fire in 1922 and has undergone exemplary restoration in recent years. The Metropolitan Church of Agia Fotini, one of the oldest churches in Smyrna, acquired its landmark campanile as early as 1856, the day after the promulgation of Talzimat, the same year. This exquisite piece of work was designed by the architect Xenophon Latris, the inauguration of the new campanile. The Church of Agios Georgios, St. George, was completely redesigned in 1956, after the Tanzimat, the same year, to plans drawn up by the master builder Eustratios Kalonaris. The new features added to this otherwise typical post-Byzantine church included the dome and twin campaniles, bell towers. Xenophon Latris also designed the Church of the Greek Cemetery in 1878 and the Church of Agia Katerini. This, the larger church in Smyrna, was reconstructed in 1898 in the, let's say, Greek Byzantine style, which was first employed on the orders of the first Greek king, Otto, at the Cathedral of Athens, and consisted in the application of a neoclassical facade to a traditional Byzantine crossing square church. You can see here the location of these churches in 1905 and the impression of the two bell towers from the sea. When you arrive at the city, you can see these impressive bell towers of the two churches of Agia Sotini and Agios Georgios. On the other churches, only Evangelistria by Litis, 1908, survived the devastating fire of 1922, but it was demolished in the 40s. All of the above is known from existing literature. However, recent research in the Ottoman Prime Minister archives in Istanbul has brought to light new information, and in particular, architectural plans for many of Smyrna Orthodox churches. These include churches of varying degrees of fame, for which there was no iconographic material, since the vast majority of them were destroyed or demolished in 1922. Let's see these plans in a very very good condition of preservation in the Ottoman archives. In Smyrna and in Serbos in the outskirts, Yeni Tommaso. Typical small churches were remodeled late after the Tanzimat with the addition of an narthex and some bell towers, which was not allowed before. Yenikoi. Similarly, images found of the half-destroyed interior of Agios Georgios of Kerasophoros bear witness to the rich and imposing decor of the church interiors, the only picture we have on church interiors. According to sources, in 1920, there were 20 primary schools serving the Greek community of the city with 7,000 students and a further 10 private schools with 1,500,000 students. In the suburbs, there were 18 schools serving a total of 2,000 students. The most important of these places of education were the Evangelical Boys' School, a 1733, and the two girls' schools, the Central, 1830, and Omirion, 1880, both recognized as equivalent to the famous Arsakion School for Girls in Athens. They were also all housed at this period in contemporary buildings whose Greek style of architecture demonstrated the close affinity between their teaching and the principles of the Association for the Dissemination of Greek Language and Literature and the corresponding architecture of the Athenian schools. So there was a Hellenization of the education and Hellenization of the Greek, of the architectural styles of the schools. The Athenian models, we can see some here, is the University in Athens and Arsakion, also in Athens, designed by Kaftanzoglou, Arsakion, and by Hansen, the previous one, the university. The Omirion, a fine marble building, I quote, as elegant as a little palace, was built in 1886 to plans by Xenophon Latris, a graduate of Ingolstadt Architectural School in Bavaria, and an experienced connoisseur of the neoclassical vocabulary. The Central Girls' School was housed in a new building between 1909 and 1912. The plans were commissioned by the Greek community from the well-known Athenian architect Periklis Karathanasopoulos. We can see these plans. We found them in the archive of the Beton Armé company Hanebic in Paris. It was one of the first constructions in concrete in Eastern Mediterranean, together with some buildings in Istanbul, in Athens, or in Thessaloniki. Karathanasopoulos was famous for his devotion to an eclecticism which owed much to the aesthetics of the Second French Empire and the Belle Epoque. It's one of his masterpieces, a hotel in Phaleron near Athens, destroyed. Karathanasopoulos had no hesitation about designing an imposing building in the classical Greek style with propylaea and pediment in marble, highlighting once again the importance of the commission in the practice of architecture. So it was not a personal style, it was an obedience to what they told him to do, a pure neoclassical building to house the most important girls' school of Smyrna. Contemporaries reserved special praise for the ceremonial hall of the first floor, a stoa with columns in the Ionic order, on which the classrooms of the second floor were supported. The famous Evangeliki School has been housed in new buildings since 1882. By 1894, it had opened a separate commercial school and also boasted the city's only library with 33,000 books and 1,200 manuscripts. We can see the picture of the library in the previous Evangeliki School, not the quite recent one. Constantly increasing needs for space led the Smyrna elders to decide on the construction of a new school in the Santa Caterini neighborhood. For this case, the Ionic order was chosen for the building again. The foundations were laid in 1909 and were completed in 1922. The school only started to function after the very last Greek student had left the city. There were other schools belonging branches of the Evangeliki Scholi in the suburbs of Smyrna, the main entrance of the building. And one of these branches was the St. Ioannis Theologos School, 1904, which still exists in the upper town in a, let's say, poor state of preservation. Small-scale school plans have also been found in the Ottoman Prime Minister archives, which in their entirely follow the neoclassical Kallias types. That means the model adopted by public school in Greece at that time. The government gave to all small cities and villages in Greece building types of schools to choose according to their needs, the size and the style of the school. So these small schools around Smyrna had as a principal model this Kallias type school. Let's see what we have found in the Ottoman archives concerning these small-scale schools around the city of Smyrna. The only exception in terms of the scale of the building was the famous Anexagora school designed by the Smyrniot architect Demosthenis Apostolidis, a native of Smyrna in the nearby town of Vourla. The Greek University of Smyrna, housed in a building originally intended for a Turkish school and completed to plans drawn by the Greek architect Aristotelis Zachos in 1920-22. The building reflects the sensibilities of the founder of the Return to Our Roots movement, requiring the incorporation into contemporary architecture of features from the broader local tradition. This building, the Kedriko Girls' School and the Evangeliki School, have all retained their original educational use and mark the continuity of the city's iconography before and after 1922. However, provision of community facilities extended beyond the fields of the church of the school. From as early as 1748, the Greek community had been maintaining the oldest and most important of the city's hospitals, the St. Charalambos, or Greek hospital, and in 1870 an orphanage and asylum for abandoned Greek children was opened. Writing in 1880, Charles de Chergère describes the hospital as a huge foundation housed in a fine building containing a nursing and surgical section, a maternity unit, a department for general medicine, and special provision for the elderly, the insane, and the incurable. Commercial building, commercial architecture. Commercial gazetteers for the first decade of the 20th century and the plans produced by God was an insurance company, so it was very detailed plans about the ownerships and describing the material in case of a fire, because they had to control how much money they had to give to buildings if they were constructed by stone or by other materials, kargir, not modern constructive methods. In Turkish kargir. So this was the God's plan, very useful to our research, indicate the important Greek contribution to all areas of public activity, trade, banking, import-export businesses, both in the European and in the traditional city, where also the non-Muslim presence was predominant. You can see some of them. A depot for the family Kesisoglu, also found in the Ottoman archives. However, although the old traditional market remained active, as we have seen, it is beyond doubt that the city center had now shifted to the new districts, the waterfront and Punta. At the beginning of the 20th century, out of 11 banks of the city, 3 were Greek-owned, the Bank of Mytilene, the Bank of Athens, and the Orient Bank. The Orient Bank was designed by Ignatios Vassilis in 1909, also responsible for the stock exchange building, you can see here, constructed before 1905, where the National Bank of Greece had its offices during the period of the Greek administration of the city. A graduate of the Athens Polytechnic School, 1892, a student of Ernst Schiller, he adopted the latest tendency to branch out from pure neoclassicism into other forms of expression, such as Renaissance and Baroque. We can see the Orient Bank on the right, and to the left, the same morphological tendencies on a more richer morphological attempt at work in the Bank of Athens by Rabaunis 1905, which dominates the Hagia Fotini passage and contains clear references to the French architecture of the Second Empire. In that period, eclecticism was the international style of the 19th century. So the majority of choices of owners and architects were oriented more towards eclecticism than neoclassicism, which was the previous historical style of preference. In the same district, apart from the typical verchaneler of the French Quarter, which were adapted to serve new uses, in Smyrna even the large stores like Louvre, Anglo-Eastern, and Toros de Bac were housed in these buildings, there were other passages wrongly referred to as verchaneler. These were later structures, mainly passages connected to busy and fashionable shops. The busiest of the passages were Tenekidis and Montmarché. The complete destruction of these districts at the fire of August 1922 and the absence of any illustrative material makes it impossible for us to identify the architecture of the lost building stock. However, the stories about the shops in Franco-Machala describe a market updated with the latest European fashions that even Athens high society envied when they had the opportunity to visit Smyrna. I quote, "For the family of Yankos Isigonis, director of the Hellenic Railways, it was a great occasion to come to Smyrna because at that time Athens was not an important city. Women crowded into the shops of Franco-Machala to buy Parisian models lace, shoes, bags and perfumes, children's clothes and toys, goods that Athens had no opportunity to offer them. Tragomahala was dominated by the Diogenes and Xenopoulos department stores, which was to Smyrna what Harrods is to London today, and brought the latest models of clothes and shoes that had appeared in Paris. Quotation from newspapers of that period. Meanwhile, new types of buildings were introduced by the luxurious hotels, clubs, theaters, and leisure venues that flooded the seafront, which, although it was largely burned down in 1922, left the image imprinted in photographic lens. The waterfront was opened to the public in June 1874. It was 3 kilometers in length and 18 meters wide and paved with Napolitan stone. There were two distinct sections, the commercial section beginning at the Konak and extending to the Kumerkaki small custom house, 1,200 meters in length, and the fashionable section beginning at the Kumerkaki and terminating at the Punta railway station, 2 kilometers in length. You can see here. Let's stay in this image. It is both the Europe of the Orient and the Orient of Europe. On one side, up as far as Punta and beyond, is the fashionable promenade, the waterfront lined with magnificent residences, splendid cafes, fashionable strollers, consulate theaters, clubs, displays. And in other direction to the commercial waterfront, a slide is missing. We can see it later, maybe. In the other direction, the commercial waterfront with the customs house, offices, the stock exchange, the inns, the cargoes and porters and sailors, the steamers, the shipping agents and brokers, a scene of struggle for life. On one side, the world of leisure, on the other, the world of hard work. One world producing, the other consuming. This is the commentary of a Greek newspaper of 1910. In 1889, probably in view of impending transfer of the operation of the waterfront to the French company Société de Quai de Smyrna, instead of the English company who started the study, a cadastral map was prepared over the signature of the engineer employed by the Dissot Frères company, Polycarpos Vitalis. The map is held in the Prime Minister Archives in Istanbul and was published in 1998 by Professor Çınar Atay. An enthusiastic scholar of the modern history of Smyrna, Professor Atay, also published in 1997 a series of rare photographs of the city from the same period in Rubelen Archive, 1880-1890. After careful study of the two archives and the Goats plan, we've spoken about them earlier, as well as more recent photographs of the waterfront, we can identify with a certain degree of confidence a fair number of the buildings shown. In the fashionable stretch of the waterfront were buildings housing shops on the ground floor with private dwellings or offices above, as well as hotels and leisure venues. As for Greek-owned properties, street block 15, according to the map of Vitalis, was the site of the Luca Saduka Theater and Cafe, you can see here, housed in the basement of the Hotel de la Ville. It opened on 1st July 1877, as well as the Fotiades building, which housed the famous Kramer Hotel and later the Greek Club, and also the building owned by Stifachtopoulos Theodoridis, part of which contained the premises of the Greek Hermes Association. In 1894, the first purpose-built theater was introduced to Smyrna. The new auditorium was the Sporting Club Theater, built to plans by Polycarpos Vitalis on the site of the demolished Olympia Theater. This was followed in 1911 by the Smyrna Theater, built to design by Ignatios Vassilis, it opened in 1911. Both new venues were hailed with descriptions in the local press of the period. Here is the sporting club, the extension of this, which housed the sporting club theater, the first period, and then after the extension in after 1910. The new sporting club theater was described in the New Smyrna newspaper of October 1894 as elegant and most luxurious, and with attractive and extremely comfortable seats, upholstered in dark red material with gold braid. Unfortunately, we don't have any pictures of the interior. A program of the theater with the most famous Greek actress Cybele. The Smyrna Theater was designed to meet the need of a new winter theater, since the Sporting Club Theater, we mentioned before, with only a limited number of seats, was obliged to keep its ticket prices high and therefore was accessible only to the more affluent classes. The new theater has something to offer all tastes and incomes. It has superb lighting and ventilation, stalls with comfortable seats, a balcony for the patricians, and a gallery for the plebeians. It's a quotation from the newspaper. A broad stage with opulent curtain, marvelous scenery, and a variety of devices imported from Vienna, which can reproduce the sound of rain, wind, and thunder, as well special machine-produced multicolored lighting. The auditorium is lavishly decorated with the most artistic gilded ornamentation, the work of the Greek sculptor Renieris. There are also a smoking room and various other apartments, all furnished in the most exquisite taste from Mr. Xenopoulos stores. The Smyrna Theater opened its doors with a performance by the famous Greek actresses Marika Kotopouli and Lepeniotis Company in April 1911. Residential architecture. The private houses of Smyrna represent a particularly appealing aspect of the city's architecture and indeed did not pass unnoticed by the architectural journals of the period. On 9 September 1901, the French journal La Construction Moderne published an article by Demosthenes Apostolidis on the typical Smyrna house. The author notes that this particular type of urban house was much influenced in its design by the very narrow building plots on which homes were constructed in the European parts of the city, especially in Punta, where building lands was divided up into smaller units than elsewhere, due to the prices, of course. Most of the housing consisted of rows of two-story buildings, the main characteristics of each individual house being the recessed entrance and the closed balcony on the upper floor. Thus, there emerged the European urban house of modern Smyrna, which began to be built along the quays, the street front, as soon as the waterfront project was complete, and then advanced towards the interior of the city, the Bella Vista, as we can see here, the Paralleli, the parallel street, and then to the smaller streets in the northern and eastern parts of the town. It was a quote again. It was a two-story, one-family house and had the first floor, really a ground floor, raised the height of just 3 or 4 steps from street level, and second floor, basement and mezzanine. The basement had no special name, but in the dialect of Smyrna, the mezzanine was commonly referred as entresoli, from the French entresol. The facade of the house was enhanced by the closed wooden balcony, the most characteristic feature of Smyrna domestic architecture. The closed balcony in front of the master bedroom provided a small but valuable area for the family to gather in the late afternoon and early evening, a quotation from a local newspaper. On the waterfront, variation of the basic house type could be found, adapted to suit larger or combined building lots. In these cases, there was the space to create a symmetrical facade, but without altering the main features, the recessed entrance and the open or closed balcony on the upper floor. On rare occasions, there was an attic floor, you can see here, where a triangular and more rarely a curved pediment might be introduced. In terms of stylistic choices, in contrast to the practice in commercial architecture, we see a desire to echo the Greek character of the various public buildings of the community, using the codified vocabulary of neoclassicism. To the left of the Photiades mention, in fact, neoclassicism was the first choice of both architects and owners, although it was not without the well-known deviations to the direction of other more artificial and more decorative forms, as we said before, the Renaissance and the Baroque. By comparative study of the cadastre map of 1889 and the photographs of the Rubelen archives, it is possible to identify a number of the Greek-owned houses. Along the Smyrna waterfront, only very few isolated examples of the old urban houses have survived. They are located in the part of the waterfront which was spared by the fire, but could not escape the redevelopment of the 1960s, when many of old properties were surrendered to developers in exchange for an apartment in the new building which replaced them. In Punta, now Es Al Sanjak, however, the only district which has remained largely unchanged, a fair number of the characteristic rows of houses have survived intact. In the absence of cadastral records, however, it is impossible to identify the individual owners of these architecturally interesting buildings. In the upper city, where the school and church of Agios Ioannis have survived, residential buildings have been identified, some isolated, some still in rows, which reproduce the same typology, at least in the organization of their facades. God's plans do not cover this district, so here too it is almost impossible to identify the owners of individual houses. We face the same difficulties, the suburbs of Smyrna, where there were significant Greek communities before 1922. Karsiyaka, Bostanji, Karantina, Bostanli, Karantina, Göztepe, Asansör, Karatas, Kopargeli. There is one special case. The two summer resorts of the outskirts of Izmir, Buca and Burnova, where there were a significant concentration of Greek-owned properties, mainly villas and smaller houses. Here you can see some smaller houses in Buca. But of all the suburban housing in the Smyrna region, the literature available only allows to identify, this is Vurla, a little bit farther. So, of the suburban housing in Smyrna region, the literature available only allows to identify the Baltagis house in Buca. We can see a historic photo and how it is today. The Gavrili mansions, again in Buca. The Xenopoulos Villa and Bornova. The Villa Homer in Cordelio. The homes of Photiades family and Sevdikiou and the Seitanoglou family and Karantina. I quote a description by Didos Sotiriou on Seitanoglou house. Seitanoglou had a house like a palace in Karantina. No Pasha's Seraglio was bigger. All in marble, surrounded by gardens of palm trees, bougainvilleas, roses, lemon trees, and flower beds full of flowers. It had a tennis court, a stable for the horses, an artificial lake, and a whole forest of trees in whose shade the sons of the master and their wives could lounge and tread. The first floor had sitting room, studies, a whole room lined with bookcases, dining rooms with Persian rugs and furniture from Venice. The halls were paneled in walnut and hung with tapestries. Ancestral portraits looked down from golden frames. The architecture of Smyrna, and particularly the type of the urban house, was to be adopted by the other major centers of the Greek world along the Isa Minor coast, as well the island of the Eastern Aegean, Chios, Mytilene, Samos. We can see pictures from Chios. Some historians call it the Chios-type house, and I wonder if it has first appeared in Chios after the earthquake of 1881 and transferred to Smyrna by builders and craftsmen, as Tsinara supports. These craftsmen were active in both cities, or it was first created to Smyrna and then transferred to the islands later. Again, Chios, Molivos and Lesbos Island. Compare Asia Minor coast and mid-island of Lesbos. Again, upper town of Smyrna and Mytilene. A village outside Smyrna, which is preserved now. Again. So, the same architectural features, as we've seen, would be used to stress the neoclassical heritage in Greek houses in Bourla, Tsesme, Phocae, and to the north, Ivali, Moschonissi, and Pergamon. At the same time, well-known Smyrna architects were invited to design some of the most impressive houses of the upper middle class on the island of Lesbos in Mytilene. In the context of these architectural exchanges, Xenophon Latris was commissioned to build a villa for Janelis and Vassilis to design the homes of Aladzas, Hadjikristophas, and Vournazos. You see how close is the facade of this Hadjikristophas villa to the Orient Bank, designed by the same architect. The epilogue, conclusion. The presentation of the architectural expression of the Greeks and their contribution to the modernization of Smyrna and its emergence as a cosmopolitan port in the beginning of the 20th century will not highlight works of an international renown. Obedience to European models, the adoption of modern types of construction, and the adaptation of a pluralistic stylistic vocabulary to the needs of a multinational clientele were the dominant features of this architecture. Greek architects could perhaps be accused of lacking a distinctive personal style. The same could be said of all the architects of eclecticism, which as a style until recently was not much appreciated by architectural historians. Despite their small scale and often the relatively poor quality of the materials used, these buildings stand out as monuments to the collective memory and dynamic landmarks in the image of a city that no longer exists. The cosmopolitan aspect of the city and its architecture, just as cosmopolitan and multicultural as was the society of the port cities of the Ottoman Empire, in Smyrna in particular, but in Thessaloniki and Alexandria as well, during their transition from the 19th to 20th century, is what we have tried to highlight in the context of the present research possibilities. They approached the new century with excessive optimism, ignoring the military confrontation that would follow. Smyrna, like Thessaloniki, has also been affected by fires that have destroyed large part of their historical centers. Whether the cause was accidental in one case or deliberate in the other, the result was the same, over and above the tragic consequences for the human factor. The image of the last period of prosperity for the multinational societies of the two cities fades. Smyrna, the infidel, and Thessaloniki, mother city of Israel, will never be the same again. The final blow to their cosmopolitanism came with the exchange of population between Turkey and Greece following the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923. Modern city of Smyrna, modern day Smyrna, is a city of 4 million inhabitants. It presents a fragmented picture to the visitor, moving from the traditional commercial center to the upper city and from there to Alsancak, embarking on a journey through time and space. One discovers within the discontinuity of the urban space the absence of the last nucleus of the city. There is a vacuum and the heart of the city, redolent and departure, absence and loss. It is only the waterfront, despite the new expansion of the city into the sea and the creation of a new quay, which unifies and recreates through the element of water the identity of the old cosmopolitan Smyrna, projecting that image like a hardly discernible palimpsest beneath the modern city, forever indelible. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vassili, for that lovely and really informative presentation of your work. It was a pleasure to listen to your presentation and also to look at these.
I try to respect the time because I could speak for 2 or 3 hours, but I know that it's very tiring.
That's all right. No, you did very well. You did very well with the time. Well, thank you. It was really interesting to listen to your presentation and to take in the scope of the presentation as well. And I'm sure plenty of people on the Zoom call today would like to receive the presentation slides so they can look at these lovely pictures that you shared.
Yes.
So I'm sure Craig will follow up with that at a later date. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then I'm going to open out to the floor in case anyone else would like to ask questions. Please note, Vassili, I'm not an architect, and so my questions.
And I'm not a historian. I'm an architectural historian.
Right. Okay, so we're going to have to somehow cross disciplines and meet somewhere in the middle, which is fine. It's what these kind of events are for. So that's good. So I'm very curious. I note through your presentation a distinction, and this is totally unacademic. It's not because I've done any research about this, but I note a distinction between sort of more public-facing buildings, schools, hospitals in particular, and private residences, which seem to have quite distinctive styles. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I see it is that the public buildings seem to be more overtly neoclassical, more overtly Hellenistic. The schools, the hospitals. And they're bigger buildings, of course, and so they have a visual impact on the urban landscape. Whereas the private residences seem to have considerably more of an Eastern influence. You talked about the closed balcony, this jumba, as it's called in Turkish. Of course, Turkish people will be will know very well about this closed balcony. It's a motif which you'll find up and down Anatolia. So it is very much an Ottoman style. So I wonder if you could comment on that distinction between sort of more public-facing buildings that had a more Athenian, let's say, neoclassical sort of Ernst Ziller style, if you like, and then those private residences which are distinctly more Eastern, more Ottoman, perhaps more typically Smyrniot.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's a nice question. I was not very clear, maybe, what I've explained about chumba. I know very well what it means. Chumba is a covered balcony, but in my book there is a whole chapter on describing the chumba, and I don't think that is an influence of Eastern architecture. It was an issue depending on the religion of the owner of the house, of the occupant of the house, because we have pictures of the same building with open balconies, and then when a Muslim family was into the same house later, was a covered balcony. So it was question of mentality, how you handle the privacy of your own home. So it was, I don't think that it has something to do with this Oriental thing, because this kind of closed balconies we can find everywhere, in Paris, in Belgium, everywhere. And it is a part of the extension of the house over the public space, over the road, to have a better vistas. But in Smyrna, this balcony is just a vitrina, as they called in some descriptions, a vitrina that it has to be covered depending on the mentality of the family living in this house. The curiosity of the house was the different levels. So this mezzanine, the entresol, as they called, the entresoli in Greek Smyrniot dialect. It was to have more space into the general shape of the house. Instead to have two distinctive levels, you have three levels. It was the comodità for the water closet. It was the dispensia for um, the personnel to doing the housework of the family. Yes, it is a big chapter in the book
Hmm.
describing. So I don't think it's an Oriental, but it was not Athenian as neither, because it was
Yes.
just
Yes.
a typology very well known everywhere. So some maybe some Greeks they like to put some triangle pediment to imitate the churches, the schools, but that's all. It was not like Thessaloniki, where we have clear distinctions between the choices of the owners, because Thessaloniki is another 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 example of a city. Um,
Hmm.
Concerning the public buildings, okay, for Greek buildings, of course, they were influenced by the Greek state buildings in Athens or in other big Greek cities. But it was not obligatory. It was not dictated by the owners of, I mean, the directions of schools. It was just a choice to adapt easier well-known type into a new building. And don't forget that neoclassicism was also chosen for the Konak. It was not an eclectic building like the Konak of Thessaloniki, designed by Vitaliano Poselli, an architect. So it was very common in this period that state, public state buildings of Ottoman administration adopt this neoclassical model. The Archaeological Museum in Istanbul. We have several buildings. Slowly, we leave the Oriental tradition, the Turco Baroque, the Turkish Baroque, with a lot of curving lines, etc. We go to neoclassicism, and then we follow the European trends, which shifts from neoclassicism to eclecticism. Eclecticism is a freedom to choose what style you like, and not only that, but you can borrow issues for different styles that make a new combination. So it's very fashionable. In the late decades of the 19th century, we have this eclecticism. The Bank of Athens by Rambonis, and in private homes. Not so much in Izmir. It was more um, obedient to the general um, rules for constructing on the seafront. You have the same line, the same height. You have a continuous front, not in free space between buildings. So it's that's why we have the urban speed house of Smyrna. And that's why it was an article in the French newspaper.
Right.
I don't know if I
Yeah.
answered. I,
Yes. No. That's a very full answer to the question. Um, okay. What I'll do now is hand over to the floor, and what I'll ask you to do is, if you have a question, please raise your hand with the hand raising functionality on Zoom, and I will pick you out to ask questions to Vassilis. So please do that. And if you don't have questions, I can always jump in with more questions. Um, so please raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question to Vassilis on the architectural component, on perhaps the architectural historical component, um,
or if they have to add some information
or
to
indeed if
help
you have
me
to add.
for further research.
Absolutely.
Very important.
So just while we're waiting for some more questions, I thought I'd ask another question. So um, you mentioned that the design of these the architectural design of these buildings occurred quite organically. There wasn't really a sort of directive by the schools or by the hospitals or by other owners of large public buildings. But clearly, there's a visual impact. The city, of course, has a large Greek population, but it looks increasingly Greek over time. So by the early 20th century, if you look at the waterfront of Smyrna, you'd be confused. What are you looking at? Are you looking at Athens or Salonika? There is distinctly Greek dimension to the city. So I wonder, this is more of a historical question, and you don't have to answer this academically, but I think it's good for the discussion. So what sort of impact does this have on other ethnic groups in the city, or indeed other architects from different ethnic groups in the city? Do they coalesce around this Greek style? Are there alternative styles of architecture in Izmir? Is there a Turkish style? Is there an Armenian style? Or is there sort of some type of coherent Smyrniot style which seems to coalesce around the Greek style?
Oh, I need a new thesis to answer all these questions. Of course, I know the answer. Don't worry. I'll try to formulate an argument.
Mhm.
There was not an Armenian state at that period, so there was not models of an Armenian state to be followed by the Armenian owners, because there were not Armenian architects in Izmir.
Yes.
We have the famous Balian family in Istanbul. Balian were educated in Paris, so they followed internationally accepted models of eclecticism or neoclassicism. So let's leave apart the Armenian architects, because we didn't
Mhm.
have Armenian architects.
Mhm.
We didn't have any Muslim architects. If you see the out of 20 architects, the 18th were Greek. In the archives, the only the Turkish name I've noticed in the plans was the one who they controlled some permits, constructive permits. But even there, the majority after a certain period were some Greek architects. So there was only some French architects active in Izmir. The one was Perret, who
Mhm.
had designed the clock tower in the main square. As you see, even the French consulate didn't address to French architects. They addressed to the local Greek architect to make the designs of the French consulate for the Anglican Church, for the Armenian cathedral. So it was nothing to do with nationality or a choice of a Greek instead of a Muslim or an Armenian, etc. It was just the big majority of architects, the exclusivity of architects were Greek. Nothing to do with a choice following another criteria than the best quality of their jobs shown in other
Mhm.
buildings.
So it was a question of supply
Yes.
more than anything
You
else.
choose the better. You choose the better to make you a new house, a new building.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, Indeed.
And the seafront of Izmir, it's quite different to the seafront of Thessaloniki. It's more regular because it was very strict regulation about the conformity of the facade, the maximum height, and the fact that each house were adjacent to the other ones in a continuous front. There was not empty spaces. Sometimes some owners had bought two plots, so they had bigger houses, and then we can have the symmetrical facade as the Fotiades building with the pendiment.
Mhm.
In the book is clearly described and distinguished all these differences, but of course it's only in Greek. I can
Yes.
translate it the whole thing.
Yes. 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 Absolutely. No, I think the certainly it'd be very interesting to have an English and a Turkish translation. Okay. Now I'm looking again at the group, and I do encourage questions. So if you have any questions at all, please come forward and make yourself known, and I will pick you out to ask your question. Whilst you continue to think, I will ask a third question. Um, and this is no, I've been preempted by Colin. Colin has a question. Please, Colin, come in. We can hear you, Colin.
You can hear me.
Yes,
That
yes.
was a terrific talk, and I'm afraid I'm not an expert on the field, but you spoke about Thessaloniki and Alexandria, I believe. How would the waterfront there, well, sorry, the waterfront at Alexandria or indeed at Istanbul have compared with the one at Smyrna? I mean, did they likewise have, well, I imagine the one in Alexandria had Greek architects predominantly, but what about Istanbul? Forgive me, as I say, I'm ignorant.
I compared Izmir to Thessaloniki and Alexandria because in all these cities we have new construction of the seafront. So it was connected to the harbor, and all these major works were connected to the importance of these three harbors after the opening of the Canal of Suez. So a lot of products from Asia Minor, from Europe, they were through these three ports to the through to the Suez Canal. So they have to reorganize the harbor facilities. That's why we have new seafronts, new ports in Izmir, in Thessaloniki, in Alexandria, in Istanbul, of course, but not a new key, new not a seafront. We have custom works, we have extension of the port, but not the same seafront as we had in Thessaloniki and in Izmir and Alexandria. Is the topography that permits this. You have these cities are open to the sea after the destruction of the in Thessaloniki the sea walls, because there was sea walls before, useless after the new techniques of war. No, you don't need the sea walls, and it was the first step for the modernization of the city, to open the city to the sea and reorganize the port and the railway station. So you have all these new roads for traffic from the Central Europe through Thessaloniki, through Piraeus, to the Canal of Suez. The same thing with Izmir and his hinterland, the Asia Minor area. But it was not the same morphology, because I explained it was not the same legislation concerning the construction of the seafront. In Thessaloniki was more owners felt more free to choose what they are constructing. So there's no the same uniformity. But Smyrna, it's not only the seafront. That's why I try to speak about the public buildings, the schools, the churches, and the neighborhoods, because the seafront is not separate. It's connected to the interior of the city.
Thank you. And as a supplementary, what proportion would you say in Smyrna of the buildings pre-1922 actually survive? I mean, the ones that were put up, obviously the seafront, but the extension of the seafront, but the public buildings, or indeed the domestic buildings. Is it possible to give a rough estimate?
Sorry, I haven't understood well. What was the situation before 1920?
No, what proportion of those buildings you've been describing actually survive?
Yes, I cannot give a number, but as I said, it was a lot of speculation on the seafront, because a big part of the seafront was it was not destroyed by the fire, but it has been given to contractors to build higher buildings in order to get more. It was the over value of the plot that gives this higher density buildings. And then it was obliged to extend the quay to serve the new seafront. No, the only person, the proportion is in the Alsanjak. There we have no anymore the destruction of buildings, so you can have this area of Punta with houses which now house leisure activities, mostly not anymore housing. But in the seafront, it was very, very few buildings remained due to the speculation of the 60s and 70s.
Right.
Thank you. Terrific.
Brilliant. And I see that Sebnem also has a question. Sebnem.
Yes, I was just going to say that Konak is still there, of course, and if you enter from Konak to Kemeraltı, basically all those storefronts are quite intact and quite Greek architectural storefronts, aren't they? They're still there. I mean, it's hardly recognizable, but the little streets of Kemeraltı has still a lot of those stores standing.
Yes.
My childhood house was in Hatay, and it was built in 1950s, end of 1950s, and it was built specifically Chian style. So in late 1950s, I can tell you, in Izmir, still the Chian style houses were being built. So that's also another little note that I like to add. And then I have another question. When I look at the St. George and when I see these two bell towers and the dome, I always think that there is some continuity between mosques and mosque structure, the two minarets and the two bell towers and the dome. And I always am curious because when you look at the old, very, very old churches, and then they have these a little further in the same area, there is a tower. This is not a bell tower, but turned into a mosque originally. So there is certain continuity. I have no idea. I don't know if you do. And if you do, I would like to hear a little bit about it.
Continuity concerning the image of the city before and after the fire, I cannot see that we have the same gabarit, the skyline of the city.
No, not the skyline, but only the Çarşı and Kemeraltı has.
Kemeraltı was not burned, so we have a lot of original building. But there was also speculation. You see a lot of buildings destroyed and rebuilt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course.
Mm-hmm. That's and then we don't have any cadastre archives to identify the ownerships. And in the gold plans, I mean the insurance plans of gold in the Kemeraltı area, we don't have a lot of names of owners marked. The ones I have found, so I went in Kemeraltı, so it's very difficult to walk now with all these tissues to cover the facade, so we cannot see very clearly what it happens there. But I have identified some Greek ownerships there, but a lot of them, they have been demolished to give place to higher buildings for speculation reasons again. But Kemeraltı had not been burned.
Yeah, and towards Namazgah, there is a lot of condemned houses. They're still there, and stone houses, of course, and they're all condemned and cannot be touched. I don't know. There's a whole issue of ownership, obviously, as you're pointing out. Very complicated, yes.
Yeah. But I think that they cannot demolish anymore anywhere now. It is protected. The same is in Greece, a little bit late, but still what we have, we can keep it.
Yes.
By contrast, in Thessaloniki, in the skyline of Thessaloniki before the fire of 1917, instead of the bell towers, you have minarets because the Greek community was the minority in Thessaloniki. So you have a lot of minarets of the new mosques or of the old Byzantine churches converted into mosques.
Yes.
So it's more oriental
Yes.
skyline than in Izmir.
Yes, so there is kind of like a Byzantine line in the Turkish mosque structures. That's what I'm sort of always feeling, but I have no idea. I'm making this up, of course, just my observation.
You mean the Byzantine churches of Thessaloniki?
No, Izmir, and all over Turkey.
There was not all
because
churches. I don't think that there was all the Byzantine churches in Izmir. It was a new city.
No. What I'm trying
Like
to say is, if you look at St. George, you have two bell towers
Yes.
and a dome. And if you look at the mosques, there is this continuity of independently built mosques, not from a church, but even independently built mosques, later period. There is the continuity of the same sort of.
Yes, the construction in height, let's say that. But you know, the Christian churches were allowed to have bell towers only after the Tanzimat. Before, it was not allowed to have
That's interesting.
bell towers higher than the building. So that's why we have the reconstruction of all these churches after 1856.
Oh, that's interesting. Yes.
The bell tower of Hagia Fotinit was 1856. And you saw the church is a very humble building, and just the new bell tower to show that now we can build wherever and whatever we like due to the new legislation who had equalized Muslims and not Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
That was the main issue of Tanzimat.
Mm-hmm. This is a very interesting subject. This idea of continuity from the Byzantine Empire. It's sort of a much broader subject, and I guess the original inheritance happened at the time of the conqueror in the 15th century, where the only styles for public religious buildings were the existing Byzantine ones, which were simply adapted to be mosques, and then that tradition has continued.
Not all of them. There were some small churches kept for the Christian used by the Christians.
Yes, no, I'm saying more the style was
of course,
borrowed,
in some
adapted.
monasteries, in small churches were still functioning as Christian churches.
Yes, of course, absolutely.
And then you have the new churches before and after the Tanzimat. Before the Tanzimat, it's like small basilicas with a limit in height, and then after Tanzimat, you have all these glorious churches you can see in Athens, not in Athens, in Thessaloniki, in Izmir, because it was allowed.
Yeah. Okay. I don't see any more questions. Would anyone like to come in with a last question? If not, I'll subject you to one more of my own. Vassilis.
Yes, I'm hearing.
Okay. All right. So the last question is just a point about state buildings in Izmir, and I'm thinking of things like the stock exchange, things that are publicly funded, and where the client would have been the Ottoman state or the local authority. Was there a demand for a particular architectural style in this context? So, for example, I'm thinking of the stock exchange particularly because the stock exchange is a fine example of a sort of Ottoman neoclassical mix of styles. Now, I don't know if the architect was Greek, so I'm not sticking my neck out and saying this is related in some way to your research. But what was there a particular demand for a certain type of architecture among the state governors of the city at the time for buildings like that, and were Greek architects influenced by this?
You could be a very good architectural historian. You touch very nice issues on this subject. I think we have not written sources about the commission. How was the commission from the state to the private architects? But I think that the architects could follow the fashion of the same buildings abroad, because when the function of a building was reorganized, they couldn't find similar buildings in the Ottoman tradition, the local tradition, to house this new reorganized function. So it was easier to copy from abroad. So a public building in Ottoman state after the Tanzimat, it was similar to a state building in Paris, in Berlin, in Vienna. The difference was in style, the materials, but in size, not the style. The style was a decision of the state in that in these countries, but I think for the Ottoman state, it was just the desire to follow what was in fashionable abroad. So that's why we have in the beginning neoclassical buildings, more neoclassical buildings than eclectic, and then in the end we have eclectic buildings because they follow the examples from the Central Europe, especially Germany and France, because the most important professors in the School of Architecture and Engineering in Istanbul was Vallori and Yahmoud, who represent the French and the German school. So you have, of course, you have influences from these two countries, not only in style, but in legislation, in construction regulations, etc. But the style I don't think that it was dictated by the state.
By the state, yeah.
Only in private commissions you can see the desire of the owner to give a neoclassical style or neo-Egyptian style because they wanted to give the more importance to their native place. For instance, a Greek from Alexandria wanted to make something reminding him Athens, etc., or in Bucharest, etc. There are different cases. I cannot explain now. The one thing I can conclude concerning the public commissions, I think that the Ottoman state, who had to reorganize all the state buildings in all big Ottoman cities, had some ready-made models, and the engineers in the other cities had to choose from these models what it was more suitable to the scale and the location to be built in the other cities. That's why we have similarities of public buildings concerning hospitals, administration buildings, schools in the major cities who less or more they copy the same models, but that's an idea of I have, and other historians have the same idea, but there was not a written source that shows that the Ottoman state had a repertoire of different buildings, and then the architect was free to choose what it was more suitable for a specific case. But I think there were models.
Yes.
Prepared.
Yes, that's
and
interesting.
we don't have in the Ottoman archives, there is we don't have plans of state buildings. We have only plans of buildings commissioned by the different communities. That's why you can find churches, schools, synagogues, hospitals, and only by coincidence you can find some public buildings because they are classified otherwise in the archives. And only in the section cart and plans you can find some nice plans they have taken from their respective files to put in this cart and plans archive in order to show just well designed facades and plans, etc. So it's very complicated, the research in the Ottoman archives.
Yeah, sure. No,
very useful. If you find some keys to work, it's nice.
Absolutely. No, the reason I asked the question is because I spent some time in Izmir for my own research, and I was always impressed by this building, the old Ottoman Stock Exchange, which has a hybrid characteristics. It has the neoclassical characteristic, but it also with its sort of vaulted dome with a sort of kind of pointed top, resembles this Neo-Egyptian style. I think you mentioned. So I wonder whether the architect could have himself been Alexandrian for that reason, because it sort of looks less Ottoman, more redolent of the.
Let's say international style.
Yes, but it's a sort of
international.
Sure.
The majority of architects were students in Paris or in Berlin or in Vienna, so they designed the same buildings all over the world because they were active all over the world. So you can see similarities in Argentina with Thessaloniki, in Algiers, in Casablanca. It's another issue. I have written a lot on this about studies of architecture in European schools, but it's far from our topic.
Indeed.
And then
Indeed.
difficult to find permits of construction concerning private dwellings in the Ottoman archives. We don't know how it is they are classified. Nobody has found them. No idea.
Yeah,
only in private archives of architects we can locate some plans.
Right. Yes.
We have to wait the young generation to look.
That's laying down the gauntlet.
I'm not very optimistic that the young generation go very often to the archives and make this kind of research.
Well,
let's hope they will do.
Hopefully more will. So I think, Craig, we've run out of time unless you feel we can squeeze in another question. Because I've seen that somebody has posted a question just now in the chat. Nesrin has posted about interior architecture. So, Craig, you are the boss. You tell us, do we have time for another question?
Well, I'm not sure if interior architecture is something we can actually cover because that is more
interior
like design. Yeah. So I defer to our professor to say if there's anything to comment on that.
So perhaps Nesrin can make her question verbally and elaborate on what she means by interior architecture.
I'd love to have more information about interior architecture. We have no pictures of interior of houses. The only thing we know about interior architecture is what they were selling in the big department stores in Izmir. So we have some material about furniture, about decorative elements. Yes, it was a catalog of what they had in the department stores. So we can presume that they bought from these stores and their homes were furnished by these big European stores, branches of especially Austrian big department stores. I speak about Rosdi-Bach, Tiering, Stein. We have the branches in Istanbul, in Thessaloniki, in Alexandria, in Cairo. I don't think if we have these branches in Izmir. I haven't found any pictures. And if I don't have pictures, I don't comment a house because I cannot comment a house without a picture. So my starting point is to find iconographic material.
Brilliant. Well, fantastic. I think we'll have to call it a day there. That was a really fascinating talk, Vassili. That I think you can tell from the chat that people on the call really appreciated it and are very interested to read more. And I'm sure avidly await the book's translation.
So let's translate the book into English.
And Turkish. Yes. I think that's the next step. Yes. I think we have to find perhaps the Anglo-Turkish Society can try and find a translator for the book.
Because the other book I've told you about, the Greek and Ottoman Empire, was sold in Turkey and it was sold out in 3 months.
Oh, I'm sure there'd be a lot of interest. I'm sure there'd be a lot of interest on the subject.
I don't know. I'm waiting.
Yeah, I'm sure that there is increasing interest in the subject.
Yes, there was some proposals from the municipality of Smyrna, of university, but we are not sure about what it will be. the result of these negotiations.
We wish you the very best, and it was a real pleasure to meet you and to hear your presentation. Yes, I'm sure we will stay in touch. And to all of you attending on Zoom, we look forward to welcoming you to our next event at the Anglo-Turkish Society. So thank you very much.
In the audience, how many people are in the audience?
There were over 30. Now there were 18. I think people have sort of slowly had to filter out as the went past 1 hour and a half. But yes, we did have over 30. It was a very good turnout. That's I think quite good, isn't it? 30 for an online talk. Yeah. So great. Thank you very much, Vassili. And
thank you for your presentation, for your nice questions. And let's hope that we will have further collaboration on similar issues.
Great. Fantastic. And thank you to everyone for attending.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Goodbye.